All right, how's everybody doing? Welcome to the fourth part of our speaker series for the Digital Entrepreneurship class. So very happy to have Nikki Rowling from Titan Music Group here with us today, and Cindy Royal is going to be doing the Q&A with her. But first, Cindy has a few things to mention to y'all, so I'll turn it over to her. Don't forget, undergrads, before you leave, make sure you sign in with me at the end of this. Okay, I'll be over here at this table. Cindy?
Hi, everyone. Can we turn that? Well, maybe I've got it too close. Let's get this down a little bit further. Okay. Can everybody hear me now? That's a little bit better. Okay. Really nice to see all of you again today. And before we get started with our main session, I just want to let you know about a couple of projects that we've been working on. I mean, the topic today is about music, the music business, music in the community, and what better time to talk about that in just, days before South by Southwest starting. I have a group of students who are going to be covering South by Southwest Interactive. They've really been working on it all semester long, a project we call South by Texas State, and we've been doing it for 8 years. And some of the people who are working on that project are here. If you are working on that project, raise your hand. Becky, John has worked on it, JC, Jordan, where Kimberly was here, she's working on it. So we have 5 students who are going to be going. They've been doing previews all semester long, and this is the website. So if you want to take a look at sxtxstate.com, you can see what they've covered. If you follow us during spring break, starting on Friday, you'll be able to see all the coverage that they're doing. And we have a Twitter account, sxtxstate, that you can follow, and Instagram, sxtxstate. So it's almost like you're there. How many of you guys are going to be doing something at South by Southwest yourselves? A lot of people. Very good. Okay, good. Seen a few bands just wandering around Austin? Okay, excellent. And then this past weekend, a group of students was in Atlanta at a conference called NICAR, the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. And they also did a reporting project for that. So you can go and see at the txstnicar.com site and see some of the things that they learned there. So, we really believe in these experience learning projects, bringing students out into the world. They had a really good time. They met lots of professionals. They learned about a lot of new coding concepts. They learned about things that they learned directly in some classes that we're teaching, and some new stuff too. So I just want to let you guys know about those 2 projects. Okay, so to get started with this evening, we're really lucky to have with us tonight Nikki Rowling. I've known Nikki for several years. We met a long time ago when she was helping a mutual friend with his band. And so Nikki's been involved in the music industry for a really, really long time. She's the founder of the Titan Music Group, and it provides data-driven market analytics, business plan creation, systems development for artists, labels, and investors. Her company also consults with entrepreneurs on how to improve their current business plans and marketing infrastructures. Before that, she co-founded the Austin Music Foundation that some of you may have heard of, or maybe you've attended some of their events. So under her direction, the foundation became a nationally recognized model for supporting independent artists. And before that, she worked for 2 high-tech startups. So we're going to learn a lot more about all of that. And she's won many, many accolades. She's the recipient of the State Bar of Texas Cindy Lazari Artist Advocate Award. She was a graduate of the Leadership Austin class of 2011, a 2010 honoree of Activate's Rising Star of Texas Elite 100 for her work in growing entrepreneurship in Central Texas. And she has served as a board member for many organizations, including Austin Music People, which many of you may have heard of. And she was the 2011 recipient of the Texas State Bar in Bar Entertainment and Sports Law section. Cindy Liz, I already have that in here, that's twice. Okay, she only won it once. So let's welcome Nikki Rowling to Texas State. So the first thing I want to know is, why has music been a career passion of yours for the past more than a decade? Why music?
I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. I'm from Austin. I grew up here. I was raised here, so I'm a little bit of an outlier in that respect, I guess. I am not a musician of any type. Woe be the person who asks me to play anything. But I've always had a lot of friends who were artists. And I went to UT, and I was sort of that quintessential club kid at the time. But my music education was really Antones and Black Cat and Hole in the Wall and places like that, which is where all of my free money went. and a lot more time than should have gone there, probably. It's always just been a passionate interest of mine. That's where it started. It has evolved into sort of whole other directions. As I've gotten older, my interests have kind of grown along an interesting path. But I find that for me, continuing to invest my energy and my time into the growth and development of the artist class in Austin and of the economy around Austin and elsewhere, in the last few years has just been an abiding interest. Mm-hmm. So it was a personal passion in a way that carried forward. I started in another career field and made a jump into music.
So tell us about starting the Austin Music Foundation first. What was it like to get something like that off the ground? It is a nonprofit.
It is.
And talk about that process and the decision for it to be a nonprofit.
So at the time that we were looking at starting Austin Music Foundation, it was myself and another person, old friend named Colin Kendrick, who co-founded that organization. At the time, we were both working in high-tech companies. He was actually working, in fact, at that time, I think both of us were in startups that were doing well and growing, and good things were happening. And the original idea actually started with him. He had done his MBA on the feasibility of a nonprofit record label. And it started a monthly conversation. We'd go out to dinner and sort of talk about these things. And that morphed into this notion. It was sort of a theory that we had, which was this. Austin has a huge artist class. At the time, we started that back in 2002, so kind of transport back to what was going on at that time in Austin. There were no nonprofit support organizations at that time besides the Sims Foundation, which is a fantastic group, but they do very specific things just related to mental health and substance abuse. It was also a time when really the shift between sort of the major label business model and what is now the many business models was taking place. It was kind of the beginning, we were riding the beginning of that crest. So the original idea was, what if we assume that Austin, Texas is lucky to have this big artist class, and we assume that they're not going to make it on a major label system, what if that's not even the goal? What if the goal is trying to teach them how to make a sustainable living just as a middle class person, right? As an artist. And what would that look like? And the reason for a nonprofit model was, it was sort of a comparison to, at the time, we looked everywhere. Who else is doing this? Where is this happening? And at the time, there was nothing. Something in Canada called Factor that was kind of similar, but nothing in the US. The idea was, what if we took the sort of fine arts nonprofit model and applied it to commercial arts for independent musicians? What does that look like? Why not? And now it sort of sounds almost passé, but at the time it hadn't been tried. So that's sort of the genesis where it came from.
And you started that in 2002. Okay, 2002, and you worked...
No, let me take that back. We launched in 2002. We've been working on it for quite a bit of time before that, and actually for a solid year before that, we did a whole bunch of beating the marketplace, beating the bushes to find out what people needed. It was an interesting dichotomy because we were unknowns. We were from the business world, and as you guys know, the music world can be sort of insular, right? And they didn't know who we were on the business side. So we would go ask people, what is it that, is this needed? What does it need? What does it look like? There was a lot of cynicism and skepticism is probably a better word from the music industry folks at the time. But when we talked to the artists, we got a very different story. And we put together a survey, we got lots of volunteers and sent them out into clubs and to gather lots of information, really understand the market research of what was needed. That was the basis of the programs that we built. So I felt fairly confident they would work because we built them from what the market told us. But it was a decision point, because if we had listened to what the business people said, AMF would have never been started, right? But we chose to outweigh what the artist need was because it was pretty clear.
So you remain on the board, even though you're not sort of day-to-day with the Austin Music Foundation?
Actually, I'm not on the board anymore. I ran it through 2006 as the
Okay.
executive director, and then I was on the board for a number of years after that. Now I sort of check in
Okay.
from time to time.
So what's the current state of them
I'm a
right now?
mentor for some of their programs.
Right. What's the current state of what have they achieved that you think are the major achievements, the things you're most proud of?
Well, I think the thing I'm most proud of is that it's 2015 and it still exists. That's quite an accomplishment for a nonprofit. Austin has more nonprofits per capita than any city in the United States.
Wow.
Austin also has a habit, compared to other major cities, of not financially supporting its nonprofits very well. There's lots of volunteer time in Austin. If you look at sort of the national data, lots of people want to give time and be involved. Not so many people want to write checks. So it's a very competitive environment to stay alive. And the messaging around AMF has always been a difficult one for the broader market to understand. People in the music industry get it. But, if you work in real estate or you work in whatever, it just doesn't necessarily connect to you why this is critical. So I think the biggest accomplishment is they're still there. They're very active. And they have expanded. I mean, when I was there, we grew to 4,000 members. So and we were able to sort of bridge artist community, music business community, down City Hall. So a lot of civic engagement, which had not happened at any level before that. And the broader sort of fan community. That we became a place to create a center of gravity around that, because at the time it just didn't exist. Austin is really lucky to have the amount of nonprofit music support that it does. It's an outlier. Most cities don't have that. Right. Even the ones that have really large music communities just don't have that. So, and they've expanded, they've also expanded their program beyond just musician support. And the support looks like teaching artists how to grow their business. It's very much entrepreneurially based. Always has been. That was always the plan. What they've done since is expand the programming to include a couple of new things where they are really trying to hone in on next generation leaders for the music industry on the business side, train them, teach them, connect them. And they're also identifying entrepreneurial companies that need some better training and mentoring, and they have a mentor program for that too. I think that's very exciting. I love what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And you moved on to your own consulting firm now, so talk about the decision to do that and the kind of things that your company does.
Sure. Those are two separate questions. Okay. So the decision at the time, so going back to my earlier career before AMF, I was in 2 early stage companies. The first one, I was the 12th person in. You guys are probably too young to remember this, but there was a huge tech boom here in the mid to late 90s. And so I was in the middle of that. And we grew to 60 people. Then we merged with another company, which became 250, which then eventually got acquired by a public company. I left at some point in that to help one of my mentors start her own company. So it's just the two of us went out to do that. And so through really 1996 through 2006, I was working 75 to 80-hour weeks. Mm-hmm. So that had a lot to do with it. And so for me personally, there was a decision point about how much longer I could sustain that at that time. And for AMF, it's always a concern as a founder to limit the amount of cult of personality that affects the development of the organization. The goal is to try and build systems instead of personality that the organization can be founded on, so that it can outlast any one person or any single person's influence. And I felt like I had done that. And I felt like I had done the best job I could do. That we were in good shape from a messaging standpoint, PR standpoint, community support, funding, sort of a lot of those things were in a good place. And it felt like a tipping point to me, as a founder. It was time to move on. So that was the decision to leave. The decision to start Titan Music Group was sort of a twofold thing. I fell into it at first because I was looking for things where I knew I could take the skills I had developed and monetize that in some way as a consultant. So it started as sort of an early shifting amorphous idea that became more clear to me as the music industry has been, as you guys know, it's evolving really rapidly, right? So what people needed in 2007 isn't really the same as the way things are looked at now. That's actually suited me really well. I have a very odd, unique, weird set of specialized skills that make me pretty apt at doing the kinds of things I do now. And to the list that Cindy was talking about, what I've really, in the last 3-4 years, focused most on are helping trade associations and governments, whether they're city-based or sort of state-based, to figure out how to use music industry and how to use the creative class as an economic development tool. What does that mean to a city, and why is it important? And what should they be doing to invest in those ideas? So I've done work in Toronto. I've done work at the provincial level a bit there. I've contributed to a national study in Canada. Did a lot of work in Canada for a little while. And then it started coming back to the States, and at the moment I'm working on a big study for the city of Austin. I'm in the 7th month of that study. It'll be coming out next month.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that study, what sort of prompted that? Because I know that there are issues in any sort of a music community, issues that are specific to the Austin music community that are beyond what we think about in terms of just the entertainment aspects of it, the things you've already mentioned. So what do you hope that survey will result in?
Let me ask you guys this. How many of you guys have heard of Richard Florida, The Rise of the Creative Class? Okay, good reading. I suggest you take a look. It is, Richard Florida wrote that book, which he's since re-edited, I think, in 2012. But it first came out in 06, 07, I think. And it was a kind of a groundbreaking piece of work at the time that basically says creative industries matter to a city's economy in a lot of ways. And it's a much broader impact than had been recognized previously. So his whole book is exploring those ideas and what does that really mean. A lot of the work I do is kind of some jumping off points around that as cities and municipalities have begun to recognize that. So for instance, in Austin, the music industry is one piece of kind of a patchwork of things, right, that make Austin an attractive place where people want to be. So there's a tech industry, there's a music industry, there's great green spaces, there's, good bike trails, there's lots of breakfast tacos, right? And there's all those things kind of contribute to it's a place people want to be. In Austin's case in particular, the music part of that equation is enormous, and in some ways is sort of the foundational piece that the rest has been built on. The city's known this for a long time. They've been using it, this live music capital of the world piece, as a way to attract tech companies to come locate in Austin. And the reason is because those tech companies use all of that stuff to hire the best talent and bring it here. Because what they're trying to do is attract the engineers who can go anywhere to come to Austin and not go to San Jose or not go to Seattle or not go wherever. So it's been a workforce development tool that's been in use for a long time. The issue you get into, though, is what happens when the rhetoric outpaces the reality, right? And so the city it wants to do this study to understand what is the reality of our music industry on the ground. And it's kind of funny, when you look at, we looked all over for other models of this to figure out if we could just take a faster route to understanding this, and it doesn't exist. So when you combine economic development, the music industry, and city policy, and try to find people that are asking data-driven questions about that, it's not really out there. I think it's coming. I think it's a no-brainer. But the city of Austin hired us to do exactly that. So it started with us doing 8 focus groups with lots of different subsectors of the industry to find out a lot. What were the issues of concern, how often were different ideas coming up, also potential solutions. That turned into us developing a pretty extensive survey that we put into the field for 8 weeks, and we had thousands of responses. We had a huge response rate to that. That's significant, I think, because there's a lot of maybe pent-up need to have this conversation amongst the music industry in Austin with the city, and a lot of people had a lot of very strong opinion. This was a long survey, and you know what? We still had thousands of write-ins after that. So we ask a whole bunch of questions, and then we say, did we miss something that's important to you? If so, tell us about it here. And we still had about 1,500 write-ins after they went through all of that. I think that actually in itself kind of speaks volumes. So what we've been doing since we closed the survey is crunching a lot of data. And the city is about to have a very robust data set that will probably be interesting and useful for quite some time for them to dig through. The scope of our work will consist of helping the city understand what the community thinks the needs really are, identifying sort of top-level ideas that need to be explored next. But we won't be doing a really detailed feasibility study of those ideas and a plan after that. That roadmap is not part of this. This project has sort of been a big beast in and of itself to get done. But I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes out of it, what kind of data is created, the availability and accessibility of the data when the project launches. I'd like to open it up now. Do we have someone with a mic that can help out? And while we're getting that set up, how many of you are musicians? A lot, wow.
That's great.
And how many of you would like to work in the music industry? Even if you are a musician, okay, great. So I'd say a good 30, 40% of the room raised their hand. So I'm sure there's lots of questions. Who has a question?
About how many hours would you say that you work now on average?
Well, the beauty of my life now is that I get to control that. So one of the great things about owning a small consulting company that is not trying to be any bigger than it is that I really control my hours. I control my time. I'm able to control what client projects we take or don't take, depending on if we think that they're interesting and we can add value and do something new. And I really like that. So what suits me well is to work really sort of intensely for a period of time. I work best cyclically, right? So I'll work like this on this project for a period of time, pretty hard. It's pretty intense. So right now, I don't have any social events on my calendar at all, right? I'm going to do this. I've got some work I have to do for South by next week. But other than that, I am locked in my lair, right, writing this study. And we've been working on it pretty hard for 7 months. But when this is over, I get to go travel and play in my garden for 2 or 3 months, right? And that works well for me. It suits me. So it just depends on what time of year you catch me. Depends on how many hours I'm putting in.
I got a question for you, Nikki. So you were talking about how fast the media industry is changing and trying to keep up. What do you do to kind of stay ahead of the game and kind of up, especially with data journalism or with kind of new trends that are happening?
Or just a lot of the digital trends in music even, yeah.
Yeah. What kinds of conferences or events or tutorials, or what do you do to kind of stay sharp and stay kind of ahead of the game?
Boy, that's a tough one. Well, I don't think there's a simple answer for starters. And what you're actually asking raises what I think is a bigger question. If you're looking for the new trends, and if you're trying to stay on top of that, and you're trying to, most of what happens now is people sort of take a slice of stuff they're interested in, and they focus on trying to stay on top of that. If you're really trying to stay sort of abreast of the broad trends, there's more sources every day of stuff coming out than you're going to be able to keep up with. The added issue I have is this: that data that you find is often opinionated in one way or another. On top of that, the data that underlies a lot of things is oftentimes narrowly dissected, right? So I don't see very much that is done where there's a good analysis that is done in a broader context. That is difficult to find and rare, and so that's a problem. Layered on top of that is even some of the primary data, it's not even clear. I see a lot of stuff that's thrown around sort of cavalierly, right? That's stated as fact, because if it's on the internet, it's true, right? And it's an issue. It's a real issue in this business. What it means is that there's a lot of information. There's a great deal of misinformation. There's a great deal of manipulated information, and a lot of opinions that go along with all of it. And so I don't have an easy answer for you. You know, I think the best answer is you need to ensure that you are looking at more than one type of opinion. If you really want to get a broader understanding, look at more than one type of opinion. And there are definitely sites that sort of lend to one perspective or another. So check more than one, you know, make it a habit to really look at them all. And I would also say, you guys that are journalism and media guys, I will challenge you to look at the data that's presented with a bit of skepticism, to understand and dig into what is the source of that information, how is this being used? Is this being used in a way that supports a particular argument, or is it truth in data or not? I think that's a really important question in this industry, and there's not an easy answer. I wish I could give you that. If I had it, I would. I'd be retired on a jet by now, but it's just not quite so simple.
Yeah, and just continual learning is always, something that I tell my students, that it's always a process of learning new, through experience or just through.
Well, yeah, I mean, this industry, as you said, it's changing so quickly. We're in a 30,000-foot view. We're in a time where that's happening. It's going to continue happening for at least a good decade and maybe longer. So I think it's going to be a while before things settle out.
Next question.
Hi.
Hi.
Speaking of South by, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the fact that it's a much smaller South by than we're used to, much smaller acts, and less sponsors. I mean, well, I run a music venue, an official South by venue, and we are normally turning people away months in advance, and we're
I'm sorry, you're normally what?
Turning people away wanting to throw events at our space. And this year it's been we have been having to reach out to people, and people have been canceling last minute, sponsors have been pulling out. I was wondering if you think that's going to, they also we're giving less permits out this year. Do you think that's they reached their climax and we're going to be is that the end of, or the reign of South by, or do you think it just needs a year to prune? And
Have you been reading Andy Langer's piece? It sounds like it. He wrote a piece.
Oh yeah, I did everything.
Yeah. So the pruning thing is where. Yeah. I hear two different questions. I hear, is this the end of South by?
Not the
and I
end.
hear, what do I think about it being smaller? Are those the questions?
Do you think that it's going to grow again, or do you think that we just realized finally that it was out of control, kind of?
I think out of control is in the eye of the stakeholder, right? So I think the critical mass opinion is that it had gotten too big. And then there are a whole lot of divisions about who thinks what and why from that standpoint, right? So if you ask South by Southwest, their opinion is that there are too many non-sanctioned events, and that's what needs to be called back. And, if you ask other people, it's that there's too many headliners and not enough up-and-coming bands. I think it's a good thing to have a year for everybody to take a step back and take a breath. I think that's a good thing. I think that the other thing is this, and I don't see it talked about a whole lot, but the truth of the matter is city staff cannot handle the events as big as that was. It's not possible. Their infrastructure is stretched too tight for that to work. So the other thing that you have to remember is we're now, the new census data just came out, we're now the 11th largest city in the country. So in addition, we're bigger than San Jose now. As of 2013, that's 2013 data. So I don't know what we are as of today, but that's the last major measurement. So you have to factor that in as well. I mean, it's some of it is festival growth and non-growth, but some of it is also we have a lot more people moving to Austin every day. And they're moving partly because of those things. They want to be involved in that stuff and they want to be a part of it. I do not think this will be the end of South by. I think they've got a good, healthy future. But I think that it's time to have sort of a more inclusive and mature discussion of what it needs to look like in the future for the benefit of the whole city.
When you look at the crazy growth that it's had in the past 10 years, I mean, maybe a slowdown is kind of in order. Like you said, it's grown so much that people have not had a chance to have this intelligent discussion about what it should be and what it should become. The article that was talking about interactive and how maybe some of the things were being pulled back for that in terms of sponsorships, but the article also said that they were predicting to have a few more, like 1,000 more people than they had last year. So it's really not fewer. So the interactive has grown so much. It's the biggest part of the conference now in terms of attendees, but we still have this giant music festival, this giant film festival going on around the whole thing. We're lucky that this really neat thing has sort of grown up in our backyard. And now it's time to figure out what it's going to be going to the future.
I will say this, in your particular case as a venue manager, you said you run a venue, one of the things that we're finding in the data from this survey project, we have done a lot of work with venues. And, awesome, thank you. And it is definitely clear that South by Southwest and ACL both, because they do after shows and night shows in a lot of the venues, have a lot to do with what is sustaining them year round. There is a lot of underwriting from the big parties and things that happen during the festival seasons that make it possible for them to stay open and function and support local live music the rest of the time.
And have live acts every night of the week, 5 or 6 bands,
yeah. Because that in itself generally is not profitable.
Right, absolutely, yeah, and you can see that. I mean, you can go to a club and see that, but at least the community continues to thrive because they're able to support themselves with these other events, yeah.
I'm not sure that South by gets enough credit for that particular aspect of what they do.
Yeah.
It does have an impact on the local venues that's pretty profound and important.
For bands to be able to play on a regular basis, develop a fan base, practice in a club setting, that we have that kind of ecosystem in Austin that's bigger than most other cities.
That we have a festival that will underwrite the ability for the venues to exist and do that.
Right, but,
yes.
But what they're underwriting, the value of that is beyond what I think a lot of people sort of assume.
Yeah,
it's
I agree
this
with that.
valuable ecosystem for all the bands that play in it. Next question. Go ahead.
How is it that an artist would work with Austin Music Foundation? Would you seek them out, would the artist seek out the foundation and just go there to get help? How does that work?
Yeah, they're open to everybody. So they have a bunch of different programs for artist assistance. They do panels. They were doing them once a month. I think they're in a little bit of a breather right now because of South by and all the other things going on. But they do panels all the time that are how do you do this and how do you do that, and have speakers that you can go to and attend for free. They also started something, they have a resource library of sorts where you can they have a physical space that's pretty great actually. They've got a free lease on that space for 15 years, so they're going to be there a while. And they also have what they call artist consultations, where right now, I don't know if you know the artist Nikki in Austin. He is doing a series of free artist consultations for other artists where you can sit down and make an appointment with him and he will help you sort out what your questions are about X.
Yay, Nikia, he's awesome. I didn't know he was doing
and
that.
Gina Chavez is going to be doing that, and they've got sort of a rotating list of artists that are coming through to do that. There's also staff there, that can meet with you, on appointment basis and things like that. So they offer a number of things and ways to get help. Sure.
I have a question, River.
Oh, okay. My question is this. Based on your response to the first question, you said something like your company and you don't intend for it to go bigger than it is?
I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry, what?
I said
Speak up.
based on your response to the first question, you said something like you don't see your company going bigger than it is right now. So when you're doing what you're supposed to do, how do you see yourself containing the growth eventually?
How do I see myself containing the
Yes, eventually, like if you want to grow because you're doing effectively what you're supposed to do, how do you see yourself containing the growth of the company?
Well, I think first off, if I have that problem, it would be a fantastic problem to have. But I don't, I would say that I used to really view myself as an entrepreneur. When I started Titan, I sort of switched my viewpoint about that as I got older and as I had been doing it a while. What I see myself now as really as a small business person who is able to use a lot of entrepreneurship skills to help others build, and that's what I do. Because what I do is so specialized, I don't really know that we will be overrun. We work a lot by reference, and so I don't know that we will be overrun. If that happens, then I'll have to decide how much we're going to take or not take. I'm lucky that I have a roster. We've got a lot of flexibility in our bandwidth. I've got a roster of 10 or 11 people with different skill sets, analysts and writers and researchers and different types of people who I pull in for different projects. So right now I have 5 people working on this one. So we have some room to kind of manipulate and determine, we can do more than we're doing now, but then the question becomes, is that what we want to do? So if we end up in a place where we have more than we can handle, then for me it would be a decision point. Do I really want to reinvest in thinking of this as a company that I want to grow, or do I want to continue on the path of being able to take 3 months off in the summer and travel and play in my garden? And I don't know what I'll decide if that happens.
Do you mind sharing like a success story with one of your clients that you consulted with?
I can share one with you that's public because it's on my website. How about that? I did a project for, there is a trade association in Canada called Music Canada. They are the trade association of all the major labels in Canada. Long story short, they had been involved in some federal legislation for a number of years that had occupied sort of their whole staff, their whole identity. Well, that case came to an end. And when that happened, they'd been doing that so long, they really weren't sure what next. And they've got a pretty forward-thinking leader. And he decided what he wanted to do, instead of focusing on rights issues, was focus on building. What could be built with music industry. And in Canada, Toronto is the home, economically speaking, of over 90% of the music industry. Most of the labels are there. Indie major publishing houses are there. PROs are there. So he thought that Austin was a really interesting case study in things that had been done well from a public policy perspective. So he hired us to provide a roadmap, a very detailed roadmap of what has worked well in Austin that could be, from a public policy perspective, that could be applied to Canada and to Toronto particularly. And so we did that. It was a 5 or 6 month project. I think we gave them 5 categories of things, about 16 total recommendations. And the trick with these things is you never know when you deliver something like that if it's going to go on a shelf and sit, or if it's going to actually get put to use. If you've delivered something that is able to be enacted, that's the goal. So in this case, they immediately went to work. Our 3 largest suggestions, including the creation of a Toronto music office, which was not so easy to do because they've got 44 city council members. So getting something like that through was not quite so easy. But it's there now. They have a music office. They have in Austin, we have something called an Austin Music Commission. It's made up of private industry people who, it's all volunteer, but they donate their time to work to hear. They're sort of the conduit from the private sector to city council to recommend things that they think should be done to improve better economic development for the music industry. They didn't have any system like that, and Austin has I think this has changed under the new council, but we had something like 50 commissions, right? In Toronto, they had one. It was just not a system that was widely used because their council was so big. They broke off into committees themselves, but they got that done. So now there is a Toronto Advisory Music Commission that is getting stuff done quite a bit faster. There's several other examples, but I'm really thrilled that we were able to provide a map for them that was very practical, really usable, and immediately enactable, and that they've gone to do it. They've made some pretty big strides pretty quickly. So there's one.
Were there things that you know now that you wish you knew then when you started either one of your entities up?
Oh boy, sure. Yes, I'd have to think about that a little bit, but I will say that I was incredibly fortunate in the mid-90s to have two mentors who were wonderful, and they just sort of, they fell to me at the same time. So I had this sort of intense period of about 3 years of really fantastic mentorship, and a lot of those things, to this day, I still use. To this day, I still carry through in what I do, and those are things that I really tried to. There's a difference between knowing sort of what you should do as an entrepreneur and really trying to do it. It's much harder to really do it. There's lots of talk around entrepreneurship and it's fun to throw around the lingo and the fast words and all that, but the doing of it is really much more difficult if you're trying to be disciplined in your practice of building a business. So I'd have to think about that. I'm sure there are. I wish that I had a better understanding that it's okay to have limitations on how much time you're willing to give. Mm-hmm. I wasn't really willing to take a look at that. And I think that it might have been better for both me and the organization had I had an earlier handle on it. Okay. But that's a tough one. It's a tough one for you if you are excited and you wake up every day and you've got something that is driving you to will something into existence that does not exist. That is a tough thing to manage well.
You can see it, you want to do it, yeah, but there's only so many hours in the day, you're a human. Yeah, exactly, I know. Yeah. Okay, there's a question over here.
So prior to 2002, prior to Titan Music Group, or just before Nikki Rowling was associated with anything that you do now, I guess when you were just lost, maybe you just didn't really know what to do or this and that. Was like a certain event or just something that happened in your life that just made you want to just take that initiative to I guess do what you love, to separate yourself from people that have dreams and to be someone that actually did something to accomplish that dream. So is there like a certain event or something that happened or that just...
I had one moment of clarity. I had one that I can think of that relates to that. And it was when I made the jump from working in tech to starting AMF. And it was this. I had learned a lot, and I in many ways, it was just such a rich experience. I could talk about it for a couple of hours, but I had acquired a lot of skills out of that. But I decided that if I was going to work that hard, that I wanted it to be for something that mattered to me more substantively. That it was great to be able to do deals with Fortune 200 companies and things like that, but at some point there's a difference between what your soul needs and what your ego needs. And I had some sort of moment of clarity, and I don't know where that came from. But it happened, that if I was going to work that hard and I was willing to do it, but I wanted to have a different set of rewards. So I did that. I think I don't know if that answers your question, but that's as close as I can get. And the other thing I would say is this: I don't know that anybody really understands a life plan. What I have done is try and figure out what is it today that really drives me. Can I do something with that today? And as I've tried to, and that's a daily practice, it still is, actually. And as I do that, and as I've done that in the past, things become more evident. If you allow some room for things to bubble up, right? from the other parts of you that are not just about what is it that what are the have-tos in life, some of your truth becomes more evident. And it doesn't always look the way that I thought it would. But I think if you are willing to kind of have some trust in you at some level, know what's best for you, then you can find that path. But I wouldn't expect it to take you 10 years out. You might get a year out of it and see where it goes.
There are, you said earlier that music was a passion and that's what sort of led you down this path. There are people who say, find what you love to do and do it. I'm definitely of that school. It sounds like you're feeling that way. But then there are also people who will say, that's terrible advice, it's BS, don't tell people that. Mm-hmm. So what's your take on that?
Is it good advice or bad advice?
Yeah.
What's my take on that?
I think we know kind of where you're leaning toward, but...
Well, I don't really see that as an either or. I mean, I think that, it's not that I made that decision with no thought whatsoever about... In fact, my approach to the School of Entrepreneurship is extremely practical. It's very much about what am I going to do? And what does that look like? Because once you are sitting in front of your computer and all of the, you're not on the chat boards and you're not in front of other people who think they're going to be entrepreneurs and all that stuff is happening, and it's really down to you and what happens today, it is a very practical going concern. So, I think the best way I can answer that is the better you know yourself. I mean, this sounds a little weird, right? But it's not. The better you know yourself, the better you have an answer to that. And when it comes to business and entrepreneurship, anytime you're building something, so, if I wake up and I think I am building AMF and I start here and I think we're going here, right? The only thing I can tell you for sure is if that's what you have in mind, you're not going to end up here. You're going to end up there or there, right? It's like navigating on a ship. You don't know when tempests are coming, and you don't know when storms are coming, and things blow you off course, and you don't know a lot of things are going to happen between here and there. So where you end up is almost never exactly where you think you're going, right? So part of the point is, how fast can you iterate, right? How fast can you learn where you're going wrong? And one of the practices that I was taught that I am forever grateful for is to take 10 to 15 minutes every day, no matter what, and it's a discipline. And it used to be, when I was working those kind of crazy hours, I would do this in my car. Take 10 or 15 minutes, and the question, you start with the assumption that you've made mistakes today, right? You just start with that assumption. And then the next question is, are they strategic or are they just tactical, right? And you need to be able to have an answer to that question. And if you do that every day, it allows you to iterate much faster. Because the next thing I would do is get on the phone and say, I think we may be off course with this. Let's do this tomorrow. Let's look at this. As opposed to 2 weeks go by or a month goes by. And then whatever problem I created today has turned into some whole other animal. So being able to iterate, being able to ask yourself those sort of rigorously honest questions, and know that you're going to make mistakes is part of the process.
Yeah, and
is really important.
I think what people sometimes get confused in that is that knowing yourself is not really there. You love music. If you were committed to being a rock star, that may not have happened because that wasn't what was in you. But you found a way to your passion to make it what it is that you did with your life.
Well, look, I think it doesn't have to be a passion, but I think you have to know. It's worth asking yourself, what do you really want? What can you tolerate? I mean, if you're going to go build something, what are you going to do when the project that you're working on crosses the line with the amount of time and energy and money and whatever you want to give it? What are you going to do? So what can you tolerate? What are you good at? And one of the ways to understand that better is develop the habit of being outside of yourself to see and just notice what you gravitate towards doing. Where does your attention go, right? I know that what I do, and it's a human thing, is we gravitate towards the things we're good at, right? So I'll gravitate towards doing the business deal, and I'll gravitate towards, doing the fundraising. I'll gravitate towards some cool new idea that I can see happening, needs to go, and I'll bang, 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 right? Well, there's lots of stuff that I'm not good at. So the other half of the question is, what are you avoiding?
Right.
Right? Because there's two ways to handle that. If you're avoiding stuff, you can either hire around you, people who are really good at what you're not good at, or you learn to develop the skills. But you don't do any of that if you're not thinking about it. So I don't know if that really answers anybody's question at all, actually. Not sure.
Yeah. Judy has a question at the back. Let's hear from our director, Judy Oscom.
Well, you kind of touched on some of this, but there's a good book, The Power of Habit. Can you talk about some of your daily habits that help you kind of get things moving forward? You touched on a couple already, but anything you want to share?
I'm trying to think beyond what I've said, if there's anything else useful. I have a coffee maker in my office. The only other thing I guess that I would add to that is that I'm careful about I am pretty careful about where I will allow my attention to be dragged. So if I'm working on something, I turn off my phone, I turn off my email, I turn off all social media and focus. The quality of my work product is 3 times better when I do that. So if I am in a project or if I am doing something that needs the best of me, then I try to honor that and give it that. And that means it gets 100% of my attention. So that's a habit, I guess, other than the coffee maker.
There's a question over here. Okay.
There you go. When it comes to record labels, what's the most important thing to take care of legally? Like, I know there's DBAs and all that, but what's something you should take care of before you go really far?
Like as an artist working with a label, or as the label?
The label.
As the label, okay.
Say that again. As a label, what's the most important thing to what?
Legally.
Legally to what?
Take care of, like, I know there's like DBAs or like so.
You're talking about to set up a business?
Yes.
So like, in other words, if you want to start a record label,
Yes, yeah.
You're saying what's the most important thing to take care of in the creation of the business?
Yes, like legally.
Well, okay, so yeah, you need to set up an entity. There's multiple ways to do that, a DBA, an LLC. You need to file it with the Secretary of State. You need to get your finances set up so that you have a bank account that's separate from your own. I mean, there's a lot of little things like that you need to do. You need to file with the Texas Comptroller so that you're paying sales tax and they don't come get you. Those kinds of things.
And with that, I know you said something about nonprofit labels. So, how do you know what you should do? Like, because we've started Chapter 12 Records. And we call ourselves an indie label, but we don't know where to go from here. Like, how do we decide as a team, or the person who started it, like, okay, no, we're gonna do nonprofit, or no, we're gonna be commercial in the future?
Well, nonprofit path is pretty hard to pursue. That's the short version of that story. For one thing, the IRS has got a lot of regulations about what's allowed to be a nonprofit and what's not. So if what you want to do is have a record label, then have a record label. That would be my suggestion. Go at it as a commercial entity.
Got a question right here.
I do understand that like you say, you work on your own time. Mm-hmm. However, when you're working with other people, like, do you have many deadlines?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, of course. My business is client driven, right? So yeah, we have deadlines, but when we scope a project, those deadlines are mutually agreed upon. I do that knowing that almost always the scope is going to creep, meaning that we define it as X, Y, and Z. And as we get into the process, usually they want, as they get excited about seeing things come to fruition, they actually want it will start to grow. It's what's called scope creep, right? Does that make sense, that term? So scope creep, sure. When you do a project with somebody, you have what's called a scope document, and it outlines what exactly you're going to do, what does the project entail, what are you going to deliver, what are the milestones, what's the timeline, all that stuff. So everybody signs off on that and goes off on their happy way, right? And we're going to deliver this piece by then and this piece by then. But what almost always happens as the idea starts to become reality and pieces start to come in and become something that they can grab and feel and look and see and read and get excited about, they have ideas they want to add to that, right? They want more out of it. So we kind of account for that because it's almost always that happens. So, I think this project originally started out as a 4 to 5 month idea. I'm on month 7, right? It'll be 8 before we're totally done.
Who's got that?
As far as the Austin music scene goes, it's a great place. There's tons of live music and there's tons of musicians, but it seems like rarely is there ever a musician who makes it out of Austin or like makes it on a national level compared to other big cities that you look at where you see like lots of bands coming out and reaching that national level. Do you think that's just because there's so much competition where all the artists are kind of strangling each other, or do you see like a lack of supports or like platforms for artists to kind of get national exposure or get more exposure because everyone sees you and it's like, oh, well, there's another local Austin artist, regardless of how unique what you're doing is, you still fall into that boat?
I think a couple of things. I think that a lot of Austin artists end up moving in order to hit it. So that's a separate, yes, I do think so, and that's a separate question. So I don't think Austin is any less talented than any city out there. As a matter of fact, I think we are overly blessed with that. We have so much talent here. And it kind of goes in waves, right? It seems to me like every 5 or 6 years there's kind of a new wave. We're in that now. That right now there is a really strong collection of really a lot of very talented artists that are kind of bubbling, They're certainly not national, but they're kind of making some strides and they're getting some traction and stuff is happening. And some of those artists have left town because what happens here is that there is sort of a glass ceiling effect, right? Where you can get so big, and then what has happened over and over and over for decades in Austin is that you get so big and then you move to either New York or Nashville or LA. And the biggest reason for that is because the industry infrastructure traditionally has been in those 3 places. So you need to move to the place where you can be closer to your team because the remote management part has just not worked very well. And so if there is a cluster of industry people in Nashville, New York, or LA that you need to be around where business gets done better, faster, easier, then you move. So that's what has happened, I think. And that is, there has always been a much bigger artist class, a much more talented artist class here than the local industry has been able to support in that sense. So yeah, it's an issue. It's an issue. We're going to be talking about that in the study. I can't go too much into it, but we're going to be recommending some things that the city look at doing that haven't been done before that may, over time, it won't be an overnight solution, but may address some of that. Because let me tell you this, from an economic standpoint for the city, think about it this way. What happens if you have this whole creative class of artists, right? And most of them aren't doing very well. But right at the point when all the clubs here have been supporting them and they've been working at Thundercloud and they've been doing, the best they can do to get to this level, right when they reach the point when all that economic investment has been made in them, they leave. So the point at which they could really contribute back economically, again, it's an economic argument from the city standpoint, right? They need to move away. How productive is that? I mean, that doesn't make much sense, right? So what if we could do some things to maybe mitigate that? It won't fix that for every artist, but there might be some ways that we could make a dent.
That's kind of what I was asking, if you saw any like potential things developing or if there was anything like that coming along. For instance, like traditionally you said it's all LA, Nashville, New York, but now that's kind of being spread out all over the country, and it just seems like Austin still hasn't caught on to being one of those places where the industry side has spread to, right? Like, for instance, I'm in a local band or whatever, and we're starting to get more shows out of the state and different places, but we're all planning on moving as soon as I graduate to Denver, I think, or somewhere like it where there's just more room and more, industry to help us out. Like, management wise and other, you know.
Yep. Here's the other thing. Austin doesn't have sort of this legacy of infrastructure, because what you said is correct. Those places are the historical centers, but thousands of people have been turned out, right, and laid off. So people are floating in all kinds of ways now. But what they have is this legacy of Music Row, right, in Nashville, where they're really geographically close together, right? And there is a pattern of how business has gotten done efficiently and effectively for a long time. What we have in Austin is really fragmented and atomized. And one of the things that I learned, if you had asked me 7 months ago how much I knew about the Austin music industry, I would have told you a fair amount. What I've learned in doing this study is pretty immense. I didn't know anywhere near what I thought I did. What I've learned is that the industry scene here is actually much bigger than we think it is. But it's so atomized that it's not visible. To that end, though, there are more people moving here than you would know. And so somewhat the narrative has not caught up with the reality. You know, High Road Touring has been here for a while. Paradigm just opened an office here. The agency group opened an office here. I mean, some of the bigger guys are moving here, but nobody knows that. You know, and there's not been sort of any sort of effort to create a center of gravity around that industry function. Does that answer your question?
Oh, got a question here.
I know that you've been talking about Austin like the whole time, and I know it's like your main thing, but I'm from San Antonio. My brothers all like, they're in bands and they've been like promoting in San Antonio since I was like in elementary school. And like they had a point in time where they were getting big, and then stuff happened and they broke apart. And now one of my brothers is in this band. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, but it's called Public. And like instead of staying in like the Austin, San Antonio scene, they have been going on like tours and such. Do you think that even though they're still kind of stationed here, San Antonio, Austin, that it's all right for them to go on tours like into other states, down south into like the valley area of Texas? Do you think that would help their growth or stunt them? No, that's definitely a good growth strategy. I mean, very rare would be anybody who could make a living in one market. It's just not feasible. So, you know, what you have to, it's a lot of energy. People forget to tour, quote unquote, to grow. Really what that means is breaking new markets, right? Is a lot of work. And so you want to do it strategically, because if you're going someplace where you're not getting traction, listen to that, there may be a reason. But if your music is connecting and you understand sort of who it might connect with, what kinds of audiences, then making that effort is how you get to a next level. That's the way to do it, and it is the most predictable path to finding some sustainable income. Not that there aren't other ways to get it, but that's by far the most predictable.
There's a question in the back. Sure. The person could stand up so we could.
Yes, hello. I know you mentioned you did work in Canada. I know Bell Media is a big media conglomerate in Canada, and they also fund some of their artists as far as economic investment goes in their indie artists. Do you believe like indie artists in the U.S. will be able to get that kind of funding or investment from like media conglomerates down here, such as Viacom or somewhere?
Well, in Canada, remember that it's regulated, right? So what happens in Canada is that Canada has very different government structures than we have in the U.S. I mean, they're a capitalist country, but they have a whole lot more regulation and tax collection money distribution. It's a very different system of funding things. So the broadcaster money that you're talking about, or that I heard you talking about, is regulated by law. That money is collected at a federal level and then reinvested into music nonprofits, music growth organizations, things like that. And they have, Canada has some pretty complex funding systems, but, and there's some redundancy in there, and they have their own set of issues, but they have a lot of money that is flowing from the government back out to those organizations. In the US, for better or for worse, that is just not how we operate. I mean, you look at things like the NEA, and comparatively to any one of those Canadian organizations, like by percentage of GDP, the funding is tiny, right? The arts funding in Texas, for that matter, is tiny, right? I think those are some things that are worth looking at, but it's not ever going to be an equivalent system. So whether or not that funding is equivalent, I don't know. It's not likely. I mean, given that it's mandated there, and it's not going to be mandated here in that same way.
More questions?
When it comes to booking, I've heard that like at venues and stuff, if you don't have more than like 1,000 likes on Facebook, they won't want to like big venues. They don't want to, put the band on the list. Like, so for booking wise, like how can we go about that if our artists are new but they have a stronger internet presence through a EPK? So is it?
So what your question is, how do you convince a venue to book you if your threshold of what they need is not showing?
Right.
What's the question? That's the question? Okay. Well, for starters, the venues have a lot of different criteria and standards, right? I mean, we have. Are you talking about Austin, or are you talking about other
Austin.
So Austin has a huge ecosystem of venues, right? I mean, big to small, different kinds of genres and different things. So you may be more appropriate for a different venue that you're not looking at. So first off, do your homework. Right. And make sure that you're hitting the right place at the right time. And then start a conversation, and find out what is it they really need to see. And if you're not hitting it yet, then your job as the label is to figure out, how do we get our bands there? What are some creative ideas we can do? What are some things that we can do on our own to get us to that many likes? Maintain your relationship with the venue. And I'll tell you what venues respond to every time is if you show them data. If you say, look, this is what we have, this is how many people we had at this show. We kept a clicker at the door and we know what the count was. If you just take the basic effort to keep a show list so that you know the date you played, how many people came through the door, whether or not they paid cover, all those things, so that you have that to show a venue. And you can show, 6 months ago we were bringing this many people and now we can bring this many people. Those are the things they'll respond to. They respond to you when you're working hard and they can see it.
Right. Okay. Also, with our artists, they've come up to us and they're like, what do you think we should do based off of like music for free, like free downloads and for pay? Like, since a lot of our artists, we have artists that are like smaller, that are new, and then we have artists that are playing at Free Press. So they do a lot of the stuff that are, like they pay for the downloads, but we also have a Spring samplers, free downloads. But when do you think, is it more like just what we want to do, either free or not?
Well, you're talking about from the label standpoint?
Yes.
So your job is to figure out a business model that works, right? And so one thing that has to be is profitable. There is a balance between exposure and growth and revenue. And, each artist kind of has a different crowd, and a different type of fan base. You need to take that into account. You need to take opportunities for true exposure, like if you get the opportunity to open for someone big, or even bigger than you, but you're not going to get paid, that's probably something you want to think about, right? Because that's a real direct, you're standing in front of people and giving them your whole live performance, right? The full experience, in other words. And you have a great opportunity to convert a whole bunch of new people that you might not have gotten in front of otherwise. That's definitely something that, if I'm running a label, I'm going to consider doing that for free, right? But the job of the label more and more is to get creative, about how to attract people and how to convert that to revenue. It is not easy. It is not easy.
I think what the venues are saying when they say they want you to have 1,000 followers on Facebook is they want to know you're going to have people coming through the door. And that's just one piece of data that may or may not equate to people coming through the door, right? So it's all about the story that you can tell to them that's going to make them have a level of confidence that these people are popular, that they're going to have a full house, that they're going to be able to sell, the door fee. I mean, that they're going to be able to sell drinks at the show. I mean, they need to know that. So social media is just one sort of easy way that they're saying, well, we're going to look at this. Well, that person doesn't meet that criteria. But if you have another story to tell, like Nikki was saying, that level of data with the successes that you've had, then that's another way to sell it. And then there are ways to creatively boost the followings of bands. I mean, you just have to really kind of work with the band and develop the presence, develop the personality of the band in social media. Try not to go for the cheap follows, like begging people to follow you, because that's not going to result in people coming through the door.
And they're not invested.
Right.
A cheap follow doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Because they don't have any sort of an emotional investment, you know, in the music or the band or who's in it or anything about it. So it's not worth anything.
Right. But if people are excited because the musicians are interacting with them on their Facebook, or they'll reply to them on Twitter, and there's like true engagement going on between it, then that's when things start to really grow. And then people want to be part of a thing that's bigger than them. And social media is just a part of that.
It's true. It's a part. I still think showing what you can do in terms of people showing up is the bottom line. Because more and more, the other thing though, with the social media thing, and it may be just the cheap follow issue sort of skewing things, but there's a lot of new data that's just coming out in the last couple of months that talks about that conversion isn't happening. So people may like a band, they may even really truly be emotionally engaged with that artist, but it doesn't mean they're going to go to a show. It doesn't mean that they want to. You know, they just are experiencing that in their own way, whether it's on their playlist or you know, the engagement through social media, and that's how they want to engage. They're less interested in showing up. So bottom line, that's still the mechanism that venues are going to look for.
Okay, good. I know earlier you were saying that you used to go to Antone's a lot.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite venue these days, or are there like certain spots you like to go to?
I think actually these days we're, at least in Austin, incredibly fortunate. There's a huge number of really great quality venues right now. In a sense, audiences are the ones that benefit because there's a lot of competition, actually. And so a lot of them are truly bending over backwards to borrow money and invest in good sound systems, good customer experiences. I personally would like to wage a campaign for better bathrooms. That would be my request. But in terms of, you know, audio, the visual, all that stuff, it has come up a long way. You have a lot of options about great places to have a good music experience, more now than maybe at any time. My question is that going to last? Is it sustainable? Because what we're seeing in our study is, I really believe the venues are in some trouble. There are a number of pressures coming from different places all at once, and it has to do with the fact that Austin is the fastest growing city for 10 years in a row, which is insane. That's really such an outlier, you know, as a statistic. That it has not been something anybody could have expected or foreseen how to manage, right? But what it means is all the things you know. Downtown venues are getting pushed out. The ones that are able to stay are having conflicts over sound ordinance with neighborhood condo towers. You know, zoning doesn't mean that someone can't build. There can be a venue and someone can build a tower 50 feet away from the stage, you know, and there's no zoning that keeps them from doing that. If you have already left downtown and you're in a neighborhood, then you probably have a neighborhood agreement that you have to abide by that, by the way, has to be renewed every single year. And that neighborhood can decide they're just not going to renew that year. If you have no food on site, you have to have, if you've got an outdoor music venue permit, right, you have to have somewhere between 5 and 10 permits to operate. They're all individual. They all have to be renewed every year. They all have to be kept up with. They go through 6 different city departments, right? So the headache of managing all of that is burdensome and complicated unnecessarily. And you're talking about guys that are running small businesses for the most part, right? So to the added pressure of people don't want to pay cover, to the added pressure of how do you make the money to keep the lights on, and the added pressure of a lot of them are paying demand rate, which is what's it's like an accelerated commercial rate for utilities, right, which sometimes can get outrageous. They've got permitting issues and difficulties. There's a lot of pressures in what it takes to operate. I don't know. So what I'm saying is go out now. I don't know how many of them are going to be here in 5 years.
There's the announcement that there's going to be a new Antone's downtown. So that's
Isn't
good.
that exciting?
Yeah, that's
I'm very
exciting.
excited
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a terrible layout in that venue, in my opinion, but it's going to be exciting to have them back downtown.
They have new owners, right? So the new ownership includes the guys that own Lambert's and also Arlen Studios. They're the main guys. And then Gary Clark Jr. is also a major part of that, an investor, and really more than an investor. I mean, he is a partner in that group. And it was important to him, right, to make Antone's be what it should be again. And so I have a lot of, what they've laid out in the public anyway is pretty exciting, and the vision of what they're going to do with it.
Do you have a favorite Austin venue?
Well, I work at UCLA, so
Okay. All right. And that is a lovely venue with a perfect sound. Yes, that's a good one to mention. We are running out of time right now. I did want to just, yeah, I know that went so quickly,
Really
didn't it?
fast.
Yeah. But before we leave, I just would like to hear advice you have for students. I mean, they're still in school. They've got at least the next half of the semester left if they're graduating in May, maybe longer than that. What are the things that they should be doing right now while they're in school to help prepare them if they're interested in starting their own business or any sort of entrepreneurial activity?
How many, can we see just show of hands, how many of you are trying or interested or thinking about starting a business of some type, whether it's digital media or music or musicianship or whatever? So that's at least half the room. You know, I think it comes back to what I said before, which is the clearer you can get about what you really think you want to put some effort into and how clear you can get about what that vision is, the better. And sometimes it takes a discipline like, you know, set aside time once a week and start sketching it out on paper. You know, if you were going to write, a mini business plan for yourself, what does that look like? And get started. I would also suggest find a mentor or two, or three if you can. And stick like white on rice, because I really don't, I think it's that system of helping hands that goes through the chains down the line that really at the end of the day makes the biggest difference in helping you learn quicker rather than more slowly how to get from here to where you want to go. And that is a resource that is really, really valuable. So I would say those two things together probably would be my best advice. And don't try and get too far ahead of yourself. I mean, really what you're trying to put together is what is your first year out of school going to look like, and what can you reasonably try to accomplish in that 12 months? So if you're going to work a job while you're trying to build a business, try to think through what does that look like? How can you arrange that to try and get it done?
Well, thank you so much, Nikki. We really appreciate
fun.
all your insights. Thank you all for coming again. We'll see you after spring break.
Undergrads who are in my class, really quickly, don't forget to sign in. Also, keep an eye out on your email as soon as we return from spring break. I'll be sending out an assignment that we have, so keep an eye on that right out of spring break. Have a good one.